Hello baby gang, today we're going to be watching a video by Kyla Xia and talk about her arguments about the BTS Paved the Way phrase and whether or not it's a phrase we should say, I guess. I'm going to come from the standpoint of responding and making a counter argument. This is discourse. Sorry.
So this is happening on Twitter now. I guess Blackpink tied one of their records, and so now ARMY is trending that BTS paved the way. So I think this rubs me the wrong way for two main reasons. One, I feel like that sentiment really centers the Western world. Before BTS, there were many K-pop idols who were like dominating in Asia, and it's like BTS couldn't do what they're doing without them, and like, do we give them credit? And two, considering how much like K-pop is basically just 90s black artists, fashion, dances, and music, like they paved the way. And I think not enough K-pop fans give that credit where it's due. Don't get me wrong, BTS is a group that, you know, their fame is something that hasn't been seen before for artists coming out of Asia, but I just feel like there's a way to acknowledge that without completely erasing just everyone who's come before them. I also just wish stan culture was less toxic and more grounded in reality, but that's a video for another day.
Let's first talk about the idea that BTS paved the way is a Western-centric phrase that erases the non-West. It doesn't make sense. First of all, the West versus East dichotomy is very fragile and honestly should be seen as antiquated at this point. Many armies use the term internationally, international success. It's not just Western success, and people dismiss that and say, well, you're just talking about the West, but we're not. We're also talking about non-Western countries, countries in Africa and Asia, etc. And dismissing that low-key contributes to the erasure of those countries' markets within which BTS's popularity has been groundbreaking. Take, for instance, India. India is a part of Asia. Many of you don't realize that. In India, BTS's popularity is tremendous. They are possibly the most popular artists in that country. And yes, K-pop was popular in India to some extent before BTS, but nothing like this. And BTS have started to tap into this more than K-pop artists usually do. They were on the cover of Rolling Stone India the first time a Korean artist did that. They did a huge in-depth interview. It was cool. This is not a Western-centric thing. BTS are paving the way for Korean artists to also tap into the Indian market more, as well as markets in the African continent, South America, etc. Another point, perhaps more to the point, there were numerous things BTS did that had an immeasurable impact on the artists that came after them. They are tangible things. One of the ways that is constantly cited by BTS fans is the fact that their popularity and their impact brought distribution of K-pop albums to places they hadn't been before. Prior to BTS's success, K-pop fans had to use numerous websites to try to ship those K-pop albums to them internationally in order to purchase them. Now you can get them at Target and Best Buy. That's BTS's impact, tangibly. But perhaps more importantly, it's not just a popularity thing. It's not just that BTS are most popular. It's that the things that they did to gain that popularity were uniquely impactful and have had a huge impact on the global music industry since. An important example of this is how they utilized social media. Prior to BTS utilizing Twitter, many K-pop artists may have used Twitter to some extent, but not really at all to the way BTS did. I mean, they had members of the group, and still to this day would have members of the group just tweet unfiltered on the BTS account. They grew a huge fandom that was highly engaged on Twitter. A fandom which also, within the spirit of trying to get BTS more popular, organized heavily in order to do so. This led to BTS winning the Top Social Artist Award at the Billboard Music Awards in 2017, which is a pivotal moment for the history of K-pop. It changed the K-pop market. Months after BTS won that award, within weeks, months of BTS winning that Top Social Artist Award, other K-pop artists, the big K-pop artists you're talking about in videos like these, made Twitter accounts. Just made them. They didn't have ones before, with the purpose of engaging huge Twitter followings in order to win awards or at least gain massive amounts of visibility the way that BTS did through these social media platforms. Prior to BTS's use of Twitter as well as YouTube, how they posted vlogs on YouTube, a lot of the K-pop content you'd get for the most popular artists would be filtered through channels. A lot of it came from Korean media sources, domestic media industries, and then was distributed through a number of different forums and blogs. That's part of why it's a little bit harder to find content about K-pop prior to like 2013 and 2014, because you have to go through a number of different channels and know what to look for in order to find it. A lot of history got kind of buried. BTS brought all of that into the forefront of the mainstream social media platforms, and that created a huge economy for K-pop artists to take advantage of. A perfect example of this is how BTS went on talk shows. And yes, K-pop artists did perform on talk shows before BTS. SNSD performed on Letterman in 2012. But a performance is something that is filtered through industry channels. You have some sort of a presence ostensibly. If you're in the US, you could just be an indie artist signed to a label and you can perform on talk shows. From the outside, it was a pretty big move for SM Entertainment to get Girls' Generation, SNSD, on David Letterman, but that was done through communicating through the proper channels, through sending things through agencies, to the press, to the people responsible for booking at Letterman, and then them booking Girls' Generation. And yeah, that was a pretty big moment, but it didn't have much of an impact at all in terms of K-pop becoming super popular in the West, as you say. It wasn't like hordes of people were like, who are Girls' Generation? We need to start listening to them immediately after watching that. Most of the people that make a big heyday of that happening are people who are K-pop stans at the time, and the K-pop stans now who lionize those K-pop artists and K-pop fans of the time. Most people who know who BTS are have no idea that Girls' Generation were on Letterman. Most of them don't know who Girls' Generation are, and that's okay. And yes, Girls' Generation, very popular, had an impact, but what BTS did is, through having this massive social media following engaged on mainstream platforms, in a time where top media industries were moving, pivoting to social media, when talk shows were more focused on their social media posts and their engagement on those channels than they were just getting ratings, getting content on the air, you saw that BTS had this huge following and you wanted them on your show because you could get millions of views from doing so. This is what happened with James Corden and other talk shows, Fallon, Kimmel, and then you saw other artists get on those talk shows, do the same segments, and get millions of views. This is a whole industry and economy that is created by BTS. You can argue that, oh, well, this would have happened anyway, but it didn't. It was BTS that did it, so there you go. And that social media pipeline, which is still very focused on Top Social Artist Award, the Billboard Music Awards, a lot of the Twitter engagement is focused on that, and BTS still win it every year. But now you have artists from the Philippines, SB19, who are trying to use the same sort of pipeline in order to bring visibility to themselves. You had Billboard create an entirely new chart based on social media engagement to take advantage of this increased demand, this increased interest in social media engagement for your artist's benefit. So that's just the whole tangent that I've made to describe why that was important. And there's like a lot more where that came from. So 3, a lot of the comments are fixated on BTS crediting other artists that came before them, but they conveniently overlook all the artists that came after BTS and are contemporaries of BTS, crediting BTS for their success. People like Twice saying BTS paved the way, saying BTS helped make the way easier for us. And listen to this clip from Bangchan of Stray Kids.
They paved the way. You have to admit, they paved the way. Anyway, mad respect to BTS. They're amazing.
Stray Kids are one of the more popular groups in K-pop now. That's literally him saying they paved the way. But it's not just 4th gen groups, like almost all 4th gen groups. It's not just some of BTS's contemporaries. It's literally people who came before BTS, like Psy and Rain and Sunmi, who did an interview and was literally like, yeah, no, BTS's impact was the first. It was the biggest. 4, a lot of the comments are focused on giving older generations their flowers. Somebody said, I really wish people would give older generations their flowers. This comment and all the other comments like it are revelatory of what the actual problem is, which is that all these folks just want more acknowledgement for the artists that came before BTS. They're channeling all their frustration about that perceived lack of acknowledgement on a phrase, on a hashtag that basically has nothing to do with it. Saying BTS paved the way, by definition, doesn't have anything to do with saying somebody paved the way for BTS. People pave the way for the people that come after them, right? So BTS, who debuted 9 years ago, by your logic, most definitely have paved the way for the artists that came after them, even without taking into account all the stuff that they did that was unique. I acknowledge that BTS armies could do better about learning about Korean music history and acknowledging previous artists, but ultimately that's not really a fair ask for most fans. You don't see enthusiasts of basically anything else get swarmed by people saying, well, you should know about the thing that came before it. You don't see fans of Paramore go on Twitter and say, wow, Paramore were great and they were influential, and see people like Blink-182 paved the way. Don't say Paramore paved the way. Like, that doesn't happen. And if it does, do you really want to be that person? Do you really want to be the old guy on the hill? Like, I remember when. Like, don't do that. You're placing a unique, otherizing burden on BTS fans to have some sort of credibility, to take an activistic, advocate stance for Korean music, where enthusiasts of anything else can just be allowed to just be enthusiasts of a thing. And them saying BTS paved the way is a statement of indisputable fact that carries even your logic in it. So it has nothing to do with a historiographical analysis of the Korean music industry. And if it did, it would still be accurate. So there you go. Much of the arguments that happen about the phrase BTS paved the way is just an argument about a lot of people saying the same thing but hearing different things. All these people are making arguments on behalf of BTS fans that are easy to deconstruct, that are basically straw man arguments because they fit the preconceived notion of what BTS fans are, which is toxic and young and naive and fetishizers and, above all, unaware of their surroundings. And that's because, number 5, these conversations are all based on otherizing BTS fans.
Am I really about to talk about K-pop stans, Blinks, and ARMY? I'm really just living dangerously.
None of these folks arguing this, like Kyla, actually take time out to talk to a wide variety of BTS fans in different settings. It's always a confrontational other setting. Every interaction with and conversation about BTS fans is based in the setting of confronting a group of outsiders, an other, rather than taking a look inside the group of outsiders. These interactions that people have with armies, they're always talking about, I saw somebody on Twitter and I tried to tell them the truth and they didn't listen to me. Instead of like, taking the time to think about, what kind of army was that person? What kind of person was that person? You're just using that very anecdotal interaction to summate an entire generalization. What's confusing about this and jarring about this for the armies who watch this happen is that if you take any time inside the BTS fandom, you'll notice, at least within a couple of days, that it's a really complex megastructure of dozens of different fandom subgroups, most of which have tensions with each other and only converge because they all like BTS. The armies that you've interacted with may be part of one or two of those dozens of subgroups. A black English-speaking army who is using Twitter a lot and does not like other K-pop groups alone will have a very different set of practices and beliefs than a white English-speaking army who uses Twitter a lot and likes other K-pop groups. So imagine how it divides across different races, different subcultures, different fandom practices, etc. So when you're not a BTS stan and you've done basically no anthropological research from the inside of the BTS fandom and you speak on BTS stans dualistically as either the toxic people who disagree with me and are mean on social media, or the good people who are the silent majority or the sad minority, but they agree with me so they're cool. Yeah, you just sound really weird. You sound like the dude in high school who was like, yeah, all the girls here are the same. They're all so superficial, except Tasha. Tasha is cool. She understands me. Like, what? Do you not think to yourself at some point, hey, this fandom has tens of millions of people in multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-language, multi-social media contexts from all different walks of life. Why am I inclined to believe the most simple idea about them? In conclusion, BTS most definitely paved the way. It's undoubtable. It's indisputable. The evidence is right there. Saying so doesn't and shouldn't erase the fact that other artists were popular before them and influenced them. Nobody believes that BTS just appeared out of nowhere and had zero influences and came up with every sound they ever made from scratch. Many armies are well aware of the fact that BTS's influences, much like all of K-pop's influences and all of global pop music's influences, are black artists, especially BTS being so prevalently using hip-hop and R&B. And a lot of the reason that many of these armies recognize this is because BTS themselves constantly recognize it. There's a song called Hip Hop File you should listen to. When armies say BTS paved the way, what do they actually mean? They mean the popularity, the social media strategy, the distribution, and overall marketing that was opened up to a world of artists that became exponentially accessible for K-pop artists following BTS's impact. As a side note, they could also be talking about how BTS's artistic influence is extremely prevalent. If you look at the K-pop industry today, they could also be talking about how social media and marketing strategies and distribution strategies that BTS have employed are now super popular among non-Korean US artists. Like if your fave has multiple charting accounts and has a website that they promote their single on where you can download the MP3 and different remixes, yeah, that's probably really influenced by BTS. Stop making the lazy dichotomy in your head of BTS armies either being the good ones who get you or the bad toxic ones who don't. Stop making the very factual evidence-based statement that BTS paved the way for artists after them with people having a Western bias, because while many people do center the West in everything that they talk about, the West versus the East is a lazy Orientalist dichotomy that in this case ignores many countries that don't exist within that dichotomy. And it's usually a bad faith argument that you're just making because you feel so jarred by these young stans that are talking about BTS's influence and you think that it has to be problematic in some way. Also, just because SNSD and Big Bang were super popular and toured in the US doesn't mean that BTS didn't pave the way for the artists that came after BTS. And that BTS doesn't have a way more significant presence inside the US than SNSD or Big Bang did. I lived through that time period. People didn't know who they were. Like, I had friends who were VIPs and Shawls. It was a niche thing. I'm sorry to say, it was a niche, and now BTS is not a niche. They are one of the most visible artists in the world. There is a huge distinction between those things. It's not even just a niche became a more popular niche. It's literally the difference between a band that you listen to and a band that everyone knows. And you can still argue the fact that these artists that came before BTS still paved the way for BTS. But even this argument does nothing to negate a 4-word phrase that BTS paved the way. You've seen a bunch of people essentially go on Twitter and say summer is awesome, and you've responded, well, you're erasing the spring? You hate the spring? Feeling alienated from the big subculture is understandable. Wanting the experiences that you had years ago is understandable, but it doesn't make your arguments evidentiary or cohesive. And I'm not trying to be an argument nerdy bro about that. I'm just saying, like, what you're saying doesn't really hold up. And if you want to educate BTS fans or new K-pop fans or whoever on who TVXQ is, start from a place of appreciation for their interests, an appreciation for them as an audience, instead of coming at them with this unbearable condescension and then wondering why nobody listens to you. And before I end this video, a message to armies watching: don't just send this to other armies who agree with what I'm saying. Send it to people who will disagree. Send it to people who will yell at me. Send it to first-gen stans. Send it to second-gen stans that just, have their problems with BTS fans. Send it to Kyla with loving, respectful dissent. Because part of the reason this shit keeps happening is because nobody gets out of their bubbles and tries to put forth a good, well-thought-out discourse about this. And I definitely did that. I definitely nailed it. So, yeah. I look forward to being told that I've encouraged harassment. I'll put it on my resume. I just want to make this video really quickly because I'm working on a long video for my other channel, Baby Gang Elliot, which you can see in the description. It's my solo channel. I'm not going to be talking about K-pop much on there, if at all. Subscribe to this channel, Baby Gang Magazine, for more BTS talk, but also just music commentary in general. We have a video about Rosalia in the pipeline. Subscribe to our Patreon to support our different channels, our community, and our art. And have a great day.